Going to take a look through the papers, and for that I'm joined by Deepti Laurent, who's going to go through the front pages in France for us. Deepti, morning to you.
Good morning.
One of the big stories here in France, which of course is showing no signs of going away, is of course this unpopular labour reform programme.
They're not disarming, or they're not backing down. That's what Le Point magazine is saying now. There's a whole host of strikes and social movements planned for this week as well. This despite the fact that the government has already pushed through, rather controversially, those labour reforms, for which is the basis of all these social movements.
Now, you say they're not budging. The government says it's promising to be firm in its response, particularly to violence, isn't it?
That's right. Bernard Cazeneuve, the French Interior Minister in particular, has promised swift action against those casseurs, those troublemakers that we've seen engaging in quite some violent clashes with police these past couple of weeks. Cazeneuve said on Sunday that the government would not, quote, let a handful of activists promulgate disorder and violence in the streets. Now, the government has gone even further as to forbid certain groups from taking part in those social movements, in particular two far-left militant groups that have been forbidden from taking part in movements this week. And that movement, of course, was enabled by the state of emergency laws that basically gives the government greater powers to restrict would-be troublemakers.
Now, one of the social movements there of the Up All Night protest that we saw on Sunday is part of this international mobilisation, but they've been calling for international sort of outreach, as it were. But Libération is a bit more sceptical about the success of Sunday's process, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. It's a really surprising article, really, because Libération has been one of the big champions of the movement. It's a left-leaning paper. They've really hailed the movement, at least earlier. Now, what they're saying is, they basically say there was mitigated success on Sunday. Of course, the Paris movement was part of a wider international movement. It must be noted that Libération is a little dubious about how successful it really was. The paper says, I quote, the ghost of 49.3, 49.3, that's that very controversial government decree that allowed the government to push through the labour reforms despite enormous amount of opposition to it. That law was not even part of discussions and conversations on Sunday, and Libération laments the absence of that discussion, whereas in other cities like Athens, the turnout was much lower. So for Libération, this is really an indication that the movement has been quite weakened.
Well, let's stay with Libé for a moment, but on a completely different topic now. We're going to talk about the duo of Arnaud Montebourg and Emmanuel Macron. They're both finance ministers under Hollande's government, and they're both eyeing the Élysée Palace ahead of the elections.
Well, according to Libération, ils s'y voient, that's what it says on its headline this morning. They see themselves there. The duo is becoming less and less discreet about their potential presidential ambitions. Now, Arnaud Montebourg, of course, was a previous finance minister. Emmanuel Macron succeeded him, and Montebourg spectacularly left the government, and I think he left the country at the time in 2014. Now, les balles des ambitieux, the bullets of the ambitious, that's a headline from Libération's article, which basically talks about how both men are sort of trying out a new strategy, a sort of politics 2.0, where they're using social media and sensationalism to sort of seduce voters, and the fact that they both get a rather politically ambiguous. And in Montebourg's case, he's been meeting with entrepreneurs and students. In Macron's case, of course, he launched a new movement. So both of them are clearly getting less and less discreet about their ambitions.
Let's move on to another topic now. European MPs are worried over this deal with Turkey on the refugee situation.
It's a rather scathing article from Le Figaro, the right-wing paper this morning. Ankara, basically, according to Le Figaro, is refusing to fulfill the conditions set by the EU in order for it to be granted an ease in visa restrictions. One of the big sticking points is the laws on counterterrorism. Now, Turkey says they can't change it because they need it to combat the jihadist threat, while European officials believe President Erdogan is using it to sort of keep his power. So for Le Figaro, this agreement is nothing but a shaky contract negotiated from a position of weakness.
And let's just finish quickly, Deepti, with this meeting between Jean-Marc Ayrault and Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel this Sunday. It's a meeting that didn't go down well, did it?
Not really. Jean-Marc Ayrault met with both the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, but also the leader of the Palestinian Authority, basically to discuss an international conference that will be taking place in Paris at the end of the month. But Netanyahu reproaches France for what he calls its lack of partiality. This comes after Paris's support for a UNESCO resolution in which it referred several times to Israel as the, quote, occupying power, and referred to Temple Mount, which is, of course, sacred to both Jews and Muslims, only by its Arabic name or the Western Wall. So this has not gone down well with Israel.
Yes, well, no end in sight to that particular conflict, much to the surprise of no one, really. Thank you, Diptyque Laurent, taking us through the French press. More from Diptyque, of course, later this morning.